Good evening. Welcome to the September 19th Tri-Board meeting of the Selectmen, Finance Committee, and the School Committee. Will you rise, please, and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Just want to let everybody know that this is being televised by Chelmsford Telemedia. And is there anybody in the audience that's broadcasting? Both our newspapers, huh? Okay. Anybody else? Okay, thank you. I guess at this time I'll turn the meeting over to Manager Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for coming out. What we know is a very busy time of year for the. I don't know. I'll keep trying to speak into it. Thanks for coming out on what's a busy time of year. This evening, we're 4 weeks from tonight, we'll be gathered over at the Senior Center for the fall annual town meeting. So this seemed to be an opportune time, given that the warrant was just signed 2 weeks ago, and then a week ago, and also we had our free cash certified last week to sort of bring everyone together and get a status of how we close out the prior fiscal year. And Darlene Lucier, our town accountant, will begin our presentations this evening with that effort. And then we'll hear from the Board of Assessors. Sam Chase, the chair, is here, as well as Frank Green, the principal assessor, and they'll give a brief report on the property revaluation and property inspections. This is our triennial property revaluation year, so it's a little extraordinary situation, but not unusual. And then I will come back and review the articles on the warrant for the October 17th fall annual town meeting. And then John and I'll sort of segue over to John with some introductory remarks in terms of providing sort of a insight in terms of how we're going to go forward, as we now, at the end of this month, in just over 2 weeks, will begin the budget preparatory process for fiscal year 2018. So that's sort of our agenda this evening. I think the best way, in terms of the dialogue and discussion, would be ask questions along the way, because if you save them up to the end, it'll be just people flipping papers and slides. So I think if you have questions or concerns or comments, again, we're all gathered here this evening for a dialogue to just feel free to get the attention, and we'll answer and discuss and hopefully provide some insight to you as well as to those who are watching the meeting this evening. So with that as an introduction, I'll turn the microphone over to Darlene Lucy, our town accountant, who will give a report on the fiscal year 2016 that closed last June 30th.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Manager. I'd like to first start off, we did have a very successful year, 2016. We just did finish our outside auditors were in. They wrapped up on Friday. They told me, just a little prelude to what we'll be getting in the management letter. There's not going to be much written in the management letter. They had a very successful audit. Everything went very smoothly. They didn't see any issues at all. I'm sure they'll find something to write up, because they can't have like nothing in there, but they were very happy to see where we were a few years ago to where we are now. They've seen a huge improvement, so they were very happy to see that. They love the one chart of accounts, everything everything brought together with the school and the town. So just to start off with that was a very successful audit, and we'll be looking probably getting a report late October, early November from them. So for the revenues, I apologize because I have a mistake on this slide, and it says 2015 revenues, and I meant to say 2016. I'm working in a few years, so it's kind of crazy. What I'd like to first talk about is the local receipts. They came in extremely strong. First was the motor vehicle excise tax. We had a $4.6 million budget. We exceeded that by around $600,000. It's 8% higher than last year. So 4.6 and 5.1 came in. This is a line item we've seen the last few years that have exceeded what we've budgeted, but I think we've probably hit our peak on this. I think next year we'll see that we're either going to be at budget or a little bit below what we budgeted. The trends for motor vehicle, for the car sales are decreasing a little bit now. I think we've hit that peak. So, but for this year we did great. We got $600,000 profit just on that line item. The other line item that came in extremely well was the permitting fees. We're up 37% from a year ago. We had a $600,000 budget, and we exceeded that by, again, another $600,000. So we doubled that revenue source. Checked with the building department on that. I mean, it's just a lot of people are doing some home improvements is really where a lot of that money is coming in from. We don't have a lot of big projects. It's really just either new homes or homes that are actually having some renovation done. Meals tax. We had a 14% increase from the prior year. We did exceed it by about $86,000, so that came in pretty strong this year. We're doing well again with the meals tax. And as always, our property tax collection, we were at 99%. Can't really get much better than that. John does a great job on the tax collection. State reimbursements, just to go kind of through those, was just, that was at 100%, and then we have our other financing sources, things that we voted town meeting to use for other financing sources. So the budget versus actual, we actually exceeded our budget. We had $121 million. We exceeded it by 120, and it came in at 122. So we had some strong local receipts in there that really helped out with that. The next thing I want to just talk about is our expenditures. Again, the departments do a very, very good job managing their budgets. We did have turnbacks from departments of around $380,000. 270 were from salaries and about 110 were expenditures. A couple of the departments that were the bigger turnbacks, just to let you know, was one of them was the police department. Why that was is they do have a 911 grant that they use. When that money comes in, I then transfer the dispatch salaries over to that grant. Every year, we're not really sure how much money the state's going to give us on the 911 grant, so it's kind of a, we really can't really pinpoint it, but that really just does free up some money in the police salary line item, so that's why there's a little bit of a turn back there, because I did move a lot of the salaries from dispatch over to that grant. A couple other big turnbacks you'll see is under the veterans expenditure line item. Spoke with the veterans agent, and she said that there's, she did have some people that the veterans had either moved out of the area or didn't need the benefits as much as they have in the prior year. So there was about an $89,000 turn back there. In benefits, in insurance, that's really our unemployment savings. We didn't use all of the unemployment line item. So that was what that turn back was. And then on the debt and interest, we did do a refunding, so we had the savings on some interest under the debt line item. So those are really the turnbacks, and those pieces become part of what our free cash is. And that's one of the next slide. If you see what the free cash sources that makes up our $2.4 million that were certified by the DOR last week, the department turnbacks were 380. We did have a prior year encumbrance of 110. That is from the school department. From the prior year, they had a large amount of encumbrance money that they thought they were going to need for their sped costs. When their sped costs actually did come in and the bills came in, they realized they didn't really need that 110, so that ended up turning back to the general fund. We did have a $67,000 return on the reserve, left over in the reserve from what we were allocated, some of it at town meeting. Again, at the benefits, interest, insurance, and then the debt that we had in the savings on the bond refunding that we did. And then the surplus revenue are the pieces that actually go into what makes up the free cash number. We had the money surplus for motor vehicle excise, penalties on interest, the meals tax, the permitting, some miscellaneous revenue, and then the extra, and we get in from tax liens collections. So that all totaled up to the $2.4 million that were certified by the DOR. This will be addressed a little bit later this evening, but we're just the uses that were going to be in the warrant articles for the free cash. Article 4 is the sewer fund for 303. We have Article 19, which is the DPW maintenance for 900,000, reduction to the tax rate of 500,000, and 747,000 to this back to the stabilization fund. Again, Paul will be talking about these during the warrant article process. The next sheets I did put in there is sewer enterprise, and one of the line item in there that you want that's really is what they consider their free cash or their undesignated fund balance. If you look down to the third grouping of numbers, there's a line item there that says undesignated fund balance of 1.286,949. That is what is in their like free cash, or that's what their undesignated fund balance. That money can be used and allocated to anything that has to do with this, either a pump station or anything in the sewer department needs that. That's what their free cash amount is. This is an enterprise account, and they have their own expenditures and revenues that come in, and they have their own free cash that's certified under this fund. And that's the amount that was certified by the DOR. And the 383,000 that's in the column next to it, that was basically their net revenue for fiscal 16. The next one is the golf course enterprise. Sure.
Question, please. Why are we, maybe this is for Paul, why are we taking 303,000 from free cash and giving it to a sewer fund when they have all that free cash of their own?
Because you're confusing the sewer operation fund with the sewer project construction fund.
Okay, which is which?
This here is the sewer operations funds. This is for the day-to-day sewer usage in terms of people who pay sewer fees, they go out and our operational costs to run the sewer pump stations and so forth. The article.
That's the 1,200,000?
Right,
Oh, okay.
yes.
All
Right. The other fund is the debt funding plan for the whole sewer capital project, which originally started out with debt exclusions and then went to betterments, and then finally, the other component of that was this user fee charge on the sewer bills. So those are two separate funding sources, accounts.
Okay, so we subsidize that, the sewer isn't a,
It's an enterprise fund. It's a self-fund, and that's what this is, for the operations of the sewer. But
Yeah.
the construction of the entire system was funded, as I said, from debt
Right, right,
exclusion
I
and so forth.
understand
So
that.
that's kept separate. That's
Yeah.
a debt plan. That's
Okay.
not in this.
why isn't that paid out of their,
Because you couldn't do that kind of a project. John can explain that one.
Just to explain the proposed transfer from free cash, what happens is each year, all of the betterment money and the sewer capital improvement fees, so all of the residents that pay the $1.05 surcharge, that money is held in a separate account along with the sewer betterments, and we earn interest on that all year. And so what we have done for the past several years is we set aside the interest that we earn on the betterment funds and that sewer capital improvement, and that money, we asked town meeting to appropriate it, the interest, into the sewer construction stabilization fund. Then that way, because otherwise, if you didn't do that, we would basically be making interest money off of betterments, but it wouldn't be going to the intended project. It would just be absorbed in the general fund. So this way, we're able to keep this interest money set aside for future debt service.
okay, I got it, thank you.
Anita had a question?
Yeah, and where is the maintenance of this, remember last year where there was a shortfall in the sewer, the pumps, the
Grinder pump.
grinder pumps?
Grinder
Where is
pumps.
that paid out of? This fund?
The grinder pumps is in this account.
In this account?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
The next balance sheet is the small little golf course enterprise that we have. So their net profit was $22,750. So they have like a free cash, or their undesignated fund balance has grown now to $52,449, and that was also certified by the DOR. The DOR will do 3 separate certifications of the general fund, the sewer enterprise, and the golf course. And next year, they will have to do a certification for the telemedia cable access enterprise that was voted at town meeting, where that will be separate, and they will have their own undesignated fund balance next year. The next few sheets, I'm not going to go through them all. They're just for everyone's review, and you can, if anybody has any questions on these are all of our, like, revolving funds, our special revenue funds. The first one is, the first page is the COA lunch program. So they ended the fiscal year with $30,342, so that will roll, that will be their beginning balance of the beginning for 17. These accounts, again, they're revolving accounts, they just roll. The school lunch program, they ended successfully. This is probably one of the largest numbers I've seen in the last several years, is $111,000. So that'll roll to the beginning of the new fiscal year. The next few pages, they're all revolving funds. They first start off with the town revolvings, and then they go into the school with circuit breaker and all the school accounts, adult ed, childcare, out-of-town tuition, summer school, and such. For those, you can just kind of look, if anybody has any questions on any of those balances, I'd free to answer them. The next.
Where are the two town halls?
Oh, I did see them.
Yep, those are in Fund 26, so if you go to, down.
Not in this list, though.
Yes, they are. I'm just, I'm sorry, I don't have those slide numbers. If I go to the slide numbers, I'll have them, because I'm looking at them. I think it's on.
It's on the page number that's number 20.
Yep.
If you look at the page, bottom right, it says number 20. There's about a quarter of the way up from the bottom, North Town Hall, and then two before that, Chelmsford Center for the Arts,
Okay, I see it.
right there. You can see they're both in the black, which is good.
Yep. Yep, so to answer your question, so the North Town Hall, just want to make sure I have the right 9, is 7,800, and then the, I think the other one, and she's,
Chelmsford Center.
Chelmsford Center for the Arts,
Yep.
two down.
yep, is 71. I just want to make sure I was reading the right line items, yep.
Thank you.
Yep. So there's just, I just wanted to make sure everybody, just to be transparent on all of those revolving accounts, those are all the accounts that are on my books. We didn't have any deficits, and there was no deficits in any of those accounts, the close of the fiscal year, so. everybody-
And as far as we know, we have no unpaid bills either.
And we have, nobody's come forward with me with any unpaid
So-
bills, so.
So we think we're good. Knock on wood.
Knock on wood. Yep, very good, good year.
Again, when the financial reports become available from the auditors, we will circulate them out to you, and as we annually do, we'll invite you to the meeting when the auditors will present their findings to the Board of Selectmen. But I think, obviously, it's just another very successful year, and as Darlene noted at the beginning, the thing they did note exceptionally is now that we've integrated the two accounts with the general government and the schools, it took them a little time because they had to recalibrate their auditing template, but now they're in good shape.
That's good.
Anybody have any additional questions for Darlene before we move forward on to the assessors? Okay,
Thank
Frank,
you.
Sam, and Sam, I know you wanted to make a quick announcement, so do you want to do that now, Sam, or you want to do that after Frank? You have a quick commercial.
I can do it at the end of the meeting.
Okay, all right, we'll do it at the end. Okay, all right, Frank.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. This is a presentation regarding new growth and evaluations. New growth is, which would include new homes, new condominiums, lot splits and additions, or items not previously assessed. It's worth noting that increases in valuation attributed to the market is not new growth. These 5 years here, fiscal 16 back to 12, show the new growth that that's been certified by the Department of Revenue for each of those years. Average was $1.2 million. This year, anticipated new growth, which has not been submitted to date, for fiscal 17 is going to be $3.2 million. The reason for that is that following the FY14 triennial certification, the DOR set forth directives, as they always do, a series of directives, one of them being that all descriptive real estate be inspected by the fiscal 17 triennial certification, which of course is what we're in. The project began last year, July of 2015, is very nearly complete with 9,000 single-family homes, two families and the like, another 2,600 condominiums have been inspected, along with roughly 600 commercial industrial properties, as well as the exempt properties. Of the estimated $3.2 $2 million that I'll be submitting to the DUR for new growth. 1.7 is attributable to the data recollection effort. Including in those things would be maybe additions that were undiscovered, decks, it's probably quite a few of them for many parcels, which would explain the new growth. There's some on the commercial side too. Roughly 70% of the growth attributable to the recollection is in the residential side. The other 30 is the commercial. Some of the dates of inspections that were somewhat older that concern the DOI were going back to the 90s, if not older. So some of these properties hadn't been seen in some time. Any questions?
Well, thank you, Frank. We know that was a large, extraordinary undertaking, doing this townwide inspections, and I know that early on, even at town meeting, when the funding was approved for the project, there were some concerns, and I can tell you, I know from my office and so forth, that it's really remarkable how well that program went in terms of a townwide effort, and so thank you for your management of that, and as well as the firm vision that did the work.
They did, and my staff also deserves much of the credit. They dealt with the people that were doing the inspections. We've had as many as 6 or 8 at a time, and many of my staff would help get them coordinated in the morning to make it much more efficient, so they deserve much of the credit, as does Vision. I thought the whole program went well. We're very nearly done with also the revaluation. As I said, this is a reval year for the town, in which the DOR kind of comes in and it does an audit, for lack of a better term, and they kind of pour over all our financials. And that with recommendations for the next year, which is going to go into a every 5-year cycle, which hopefully will provide some relief for the communities as part of the modernization bill. But this is just about done.
Paul,
Yes.
how will this affect people's taxes? Will some of them go down, some of them will go up? Is that pretty much?
Yeah, I mean,
Yes,
Frank can answer that better than me.
The newfound
Yeah.
additions will go up.
They'll go up.
Right.
Some did go down, to your point,
Some
but the
people
vast
may
majority,
see, because this is what, 1.7 million in found,
in additional,
kind
yeah,
of found assessments.
exactly right.
Yeah.
But I think the key thing is what you'll see, what will happen the next month after town meeting, we go do the tax classification and tax rate process. We will not be just spending that 1.7, it'll basically remain on the books as unused levy capacity. So I just want people to understand that just because we had that extraordinary event this year, it'll go unexpended. What you will see as we go to the discussion, the next segment of this program is sort of timing in life is everything, and we're sort of in a good spot because this is sort of coming together at the same time we're meeting the extraordinary challenge of providing the operational space for the Chelmsford Public Schools as well as the operational costs for the full-day kindergarten program. So the sort of, it sort of worked out well in terms of how this comes together, and that's obviously what the plan that we'll be presenting to the community at town meeting in October. But for the immediate year, since those purchases aren't been made, nor has the program in effect, this money will basically go untaxed or unused levy capacity.
So people won't see any difference in their tax?
Well, no, they will. Actually, they would, because you have more growth out there because you had improvement. So that being the same, you would actually see a slight reduction than if the town had taxed to the full levy.
Right.
Because, again, every $1 million is about $70 for the average single-family bill. So in essence, it could have gone up by well over $100 more had the town sort of just, as you said, just spend, Bob, just for the sake of spending. And that's not what we're doing here. What we're doing is we're always looking, and you'll hear our discussions tonight, and is we're always looking on a multi-year horizon of how do we provide stability. And I think that's what this whole effort is about.
Okay, thank you.
So with that as segue, I'll sort of just take a few moments and discuss the fall annual town meeting warrant and quickly go through the articles. And obviously we'll take some time, a little more time in some of the articles, particularly the school articles with the superintendent and school committee here. The first thing to note about the warrant is it's a rather brief warrant. There are only 15 articles on the warrant, but in some senses there are a couple significant actions that'll be contemplated by the town. So again, it's not always the length, it's really what is the content. And I think what will be noted about this town meeting warrant is, as I noted earlier, it will be the discussion and funding for the additional space in the elementary schools to address their space needs and to implement full-day kindergarten in terms of facility space-wise next September, a year from now. You'll then see that absorbed, obviously, in the budget we'll be preparing and presenting in January. And then the other thing that'll be notable about this town meeting, it will be the consideration of the zoning change on 129, the town's commercial industrial corridor. So with that as intro, The first article at every town meeting is reports of officers and committees, and at this point, I'm just aware of 2 reports that will be presented, that it won't obviously have its own articles. The first would be, we would hear from the superintendent of schools on the schools facilities assessment study, and that's the big study. That isn't just the modulars in the kindergarten. This is sort of, as you know, town meeting a year ago funded the effort to do a full-wide school facilities assessment. The superintendent will be providing a report on that at the town meeting in terms of the global assessment. And then the next one is, in accordance with our bylaws, John Souza, our finance director, will provide a 5-year financial forecast, as we said, looking out on the horizon of how are we sustainable going forward. So that will be Article 1, and if others have suggestions either tonight or in the next couple of weeks of what you may wish to hear in terms of a report that isn't on the warrant, please let us know, and we can line that up.
Paul,
Yes.
any luck with getting the state representatives?
Not yet. I mean, not yet. I
They
think
used to come in.
I think the
yes.
difficulty is that we're in a campaign season as well, and so they're kind of busy out at this time of the year. But we will reach out again and
Okay, thank you.
and see what we can do. The first thing, and this was a suggestion I think that came at last year's fall annual town meeting, is prior to the taking on any particular article, you give sort of an overview, and that's what these next few slides are. And it's sort of a lot of it picks up where Darlene reviewed earlier. But as we go into town meeting, our free cash has been certified at $2.45 million. Our sewer enterprise fund free cash is $1.3 million. Golf course is just over $50,000. General stabilization fund balance is $8.75 million, and our foreign maintenance fund is $182,000. And then the next slide sort of gives, again, the town meeting and the community an overview, as well as everyone here at the table, of what is the manager proposing under these articles. And you can see that each article is listed, that's financial, and then the dollar amount, and obviously notably the funding source. And again, I'll walk through these articles individually. The next one, again, you saw this in Darlene's presentation. What is our certified balance of free cash, and then what is proposed in terms of allocate that free cash, as has been the Chelmsford tradition, because we generally don't leave free cash certified. We either put it into the stabilization fund or designate a use for it. So with that as an overview, the first articles in the warrant are always generally sort of matter-of-fact perennial articles on the fall warrant. The first one, we take the E-rate from the school department for whatever the prior amount that was collected in the previous year under the federal program, and then we allocate it. And you can see this year the amount is $62,053. And if you go to the next slide, you can sort of see the history of that fund in terms of of where that's at. So again, those monies get expended by the school department. They're restricted funds for internet, telecommunication, and those type of services. The next article, Article 3, is funding for collective bargaining agreements. As of this evening, we on the general government side, and I'll use the word general government is because, as you know, on the school side, we have put funding in their budget because under state law, the school department does not come to the town meeting for funding for collective bargaining agreements. But on the general government side, we're required under state law to come in and seek ratification not only of the Board of Selectmen, but also of the town meeting for the funding source. And if it's a multi-year agreement, the funding for the first year appropriation constitutes ratification of the entire agreement. As we're here this evening, we have not reached any agreements with the 9 general government employee unions. All the contracts expired last June 30th, or just over 3 months ago, almost 3 months ago. We continue to negotiate. I was at the table, the bargaining table this morning. I've got a few more on Wednesday, and basically I told them that I would like to bring them before the selectmen within 2 weeks from tonight, so that, if at all possible, to avoid the last-minute trip to the Finance Committee and selectmen the night of town meeting. So we're trying to do that. What I can tell you is, as of today, the Police Sergeants Union and the Firefighters Union have filed to the Massachusetts Joint Labor Management Committee for jurisdiction. Their petition basically declares on their part that they feel we're at impasse, and therefore they're asking the state, under the provisions of state law, labor law that pertains to public safety employees, to come in and basically do an investigation and provide mediation and ultimately arbitration services if necessary. So that's where that's at. So again, we continue our efforts, but at this point we have no agreements reached, and we'll continue to move forward. The next article was described earlier in response to Selectman Joyce's question about the Sewer Construction Stabilization Fund, and as the Finance Director, John Souza, described, we basically take the amount that was earned in interest in the sewer capital improvement and betterment accounts, and we put that into the Sewer Construction Stabilization Fund, because that was and is and remains part of the sewer construction financing plan that still has another dozen or so years remaining until the sewer project is fully paid off. As we sort of moved along, as I said earlier, we move away from the excluded debt, then towards the betterment, and then finally the capital fund. And the good thing is what John does every year is he does do a calculation, making sure that the capital assessment fund is still sufficient to meet the financial plan, and so far that's remaining unchanged, as John noted earlier. So again, those are sort of housekeeping articles. The next article, Article 5, is on the modular classrooms, and obviously this is one of the significant articles for the town meeting. And so at this point, I'll turn the microphone over to Superintendent of the Schools, Dr. Lang, to provide an overview of the request under this article.
Thank you, Paul. As I'm sure many have noticed, last fall town meeting, the school committee, the administration of the school committee, was very happy and appreciative of town meeting supporting a $200,000 allocation out of free cash to be able to support our comprehensive facility assessment. About $10,000 of that went toward funding a long-term student enrollment projection to help us, and about $190,000 went to hire Doran Whittier, the firm that came on board almost a year ago to help us with that study. And as you recall, I won't go into great detail, but the study is really to try to set up the school department and also the town of Chelmsford, for the next 10 to 20 years, to help us actually do some long-term visioning around our school facilities, trying to do an assessment of the adequacy and inadequacies of our existing facilities, and help us actually put a roadmap together so that we can have some direction, and we don't get in a situation where 5-10 years down the line we have programming we want to deliver, but we don't have the facilities equipped to deliver it just because of the changing demographic. So the larger comprehensive facilities assessment is still ongoing. It's actually going to be concluding over the next month or so. One of the subsections of that report, and what I don't want to get lost on is have it just be a focus on kindergarten, because there was an overarching report that's really going to take a look at K-12, what's happening with that school system. But one of the significant segments was how do we deal with full-day kindergarten and trying to implement that in the town of Chelmsford, given the space constraints that we had. So over the course of the spring, we had several community input sessions and visioning sessions to take a look at our demographics and our actual student enrollments. We looked at about 12 or 13 different possibilities on where full-day kindergarten could go. And all of the different handouts and findings and slideshows and presentations that were made are included on the Chelmsford Schools website under the Comprehensive Facilities tab. So if people do want to go back, if they missed a meeting or if they want to see some of the information that was presented, it is all on the website. It is all current, and people can go and look at that. But we basically, over the course of the last month or so, refined it to two different proposals we were looking at, and ultimately recommended going forward with one. And again, I don't want to get into the 20 different reasons we did, but the proposal that actually had the most upside to it from, I think, the administration side as well as the school committee, was the addition of modular classrooms at each of the 4 elementary schools, to be able to add 3 or 4 classrooms that would actually be able to allow us to operate full-day kindergarten within the neighborhood schools, within the schools that the children would actually go to for grades 1 through 4, so that you had a continuum of services, you had a continuous experience at the elementary grade school levels. And to do that, we obviously have 4 elementary schools. The Center Elementary School was equipped and up to code, so we could actually attach the modular classrooms right to that building. The other 3 buildings, because of code issues and some of the requirements that would kick in just because of the age of the facilities, it was too costly to attach the modular classrooms to those buildings. So the recommendation was to put separate, about 10 feet away from the buildings, a separate building of modular classrooms at each of those 3. But given the cost of the modular classrooms, as well as the site improvements and recommendations that would be necessary, the Doran Whittier, their cost estimators, estimate about a $7.9 million cost for that program. That is the one-time kind of physical upping of the program, the construction, the site improvements. That's not the operational cost. That's the one-time physical cost so that we could actually provide the program in those buildings. And I think the school department in general feels that that is a good use of money. And also, when we looked at our long-range student enrollment projections, and we look to potentially the next warrant article that's going to come up, we know as a community sometime over the next 5, 10, 15 years, and we have to consider some kind of a new school building project outside of full-day kindergarten. I'm sorry, getting back to the kindergarten piece, though, it makes a lot of sense in the short term to be able to have the modular classrooms in the elementary schools. But then in the long term, because we do have that space need, those classrooms won't go to waste. So even if we do open up a new school somewhere in Chelmsford over the coming years, whether it was an elementary, middle, or a high school, that's to kind of be determined later, and we'll talk about that with the next warrant article. We do know already that the need is at the elementary school levels for additional space, and that even if we were to reconfigure or redistrict the schools, that those elementary schools can use those extra 3 or 4 classrooms to minimize class enrollment, to offer additional programming within the buildings. As some of the people who've walked the schools have seen, we're using hallways and corridors for special programming. Having an extra 3 or 4 classrooms, they're not going to go to waste. And the modular classrooms that we're actually rating these days, are rated for at least 20 years. So, while we want to see a longer-term solution and not wait 20 years for a permanent solution, these modules will address the issue in the short term and also set us up for the long term. And again, that came at a cost of about $7.9 million was the budget that came from Durham Whittier, the cost estimators on the project. So the school committee did vote to have that option go forward to town meeting, and that's what we would seek support from later in October.
So I know we briefly touched upon this at our FinCom meeting last Thursday, Paul and John. What would the debt service look like on that?
Yeah, actually, in a future slide, I can actually.
I can go to it. We'll go to a slide. If you go to the handout, probably go to the back is probably the easiest thing to do. If you go to
67?
67 and 68, which is sort of pages 34, on page 34. Yeah, and we'll put it on the screen for those watching in the room.
That's fixed, 4.25, right?
Yes.
And that's just an estimate at this time, but it gives you a good ballpark.
Yeah, there's 60, yeah, it's up there on the screen for those in the room who are watching it.
That's a great rate.
Well, we borrow tax exempt. That's why it's a great rate as well.
Yeah, but as we know, it's not going to stay this low
Right.
for very much longer.
So I don't know if you just want to walk through it, John, in terms of what will happen and how it's not level like a.
Right, the way this is an estimate. If you look at this debt amortization schedule, this is an estimate. It basically breaks the $7.9 million into, it's borrowed over a 15-year term. We usually, what we do is, with municipal bonds, we pay a level principal payment because it's kind of an odd amount. That's why you're seeing the first principal payment's $550, but from there it's $525. And as we retire the principal down each year, that's why our interest costs decrease. So this is just to give us a ballpark figure of, what the borrowing would cost, and I'll touch upon this a little more in the presentation. Reason we went with a 15-year amortization is, in speaking with bond counsel, we could go up to 20 years. The estimated useful life and for portable or modular units, and talking with our Public Works and Facilities Director is, people in the industry will tell you the useful life is around at least 20 to 25 years. We have experience in the town with the existing portables we have of at least 17 to 20 years for the ones we have. So we felt that 15 years was a conservative amount to use for a term. The other thing, if we ran a scenario where we used a 20-year term, but you end up paying about $850,000 to $1 million more in interest. So you really don't gain that much by going out an additional 5 years.
Do you want to talk about how it plays into the town's debt schedule on the next slide?
Sure.
We're already into it.
Yep. So, actually, you know what, could we back up and just, to this slide here?
This one? Right there? Okay.
So, If you start, just to start, to give everyone a good frame of reference, this slide here shows our outstanding non-excluded debt service as it is today, and this includes all of the bonds that we've issued up through last June, and it projects out that we would continue to borrow for our capital improvement program, about $3 million a year. The one number that sticks out to you on this slide is that in 2019, you see a steep decline of about $721,000. The reason for that is in fiscal year 18, we make the last bond payment for the Center School project and the Adams Library. So by retiring those, that's why we have this steep step down, if you will. Then you go to, we just discussed this slide about the projected debt service for $7.9 million. If we go to the next slide, this shows what the town's non-excluded debt service would look like if we add in the costs for the bond that we just discussed for the $7.9 million. You'll see that in 2019, you no longer have that big step down. You have a smaller step down. What you do notice when we add in the debt service, if you look at from fiscal year 17 through 20, basically the first 4 lines on this chart, our non-excluded debt service is going to range between $7.2 million to $7.5. 2018 looks like it'll be our peak year, around 7.5. Then it goes down to 7.4. At this point, it looks like we would be able to absorb it in the debt budget. My one word of caution would be that when you add that in, that's about the maximum that you want to go. You'll see in later years it declines down around 6.9, 6.8. So basically what I'm saying is you could add this in, but you would want to be sure this is the project you want to do, because if you continue to borrow for this and the capital plan, you wouldn't want your non-excluded debt service annually to exceed 7.2, 7.5 million. So you just have to, it's just a consideration.
Thank you.
Are there any other additional questions or comments?
Question from Dr. Lang. Is it your plan to put the older kids in the modulars? Yeah.
It would actually have the flexibility to be able to discuss that kind of school by school. It wouldn't necessarily have to be the kindergarten students that go in the modulars, but any particular classroom, you'd want to have the same group of kids. But no, that would be open for discussion, and building by building, they could make that
Makes
decision.
sense, because the little kids would be confused, I think, especially if it's 10 feet away. What are the conditions of our current, I remember when we bought the current ones, what are the conditions? Can they go another 5, 10 years, or what's?
Yeah, I think the DPW has been good about trying to upkeep the structures themselves. A lot of what we see as issues in the modulars are related to, obviously, wear. They are 15-plus years old. A lot of it's cosmetic. You'll see floor tiles popping or things along those lines. But I know, like at South Row this past summer, DPW spent a lot of time in the exteriors trying to, kind of beautify them a little bit and keep them going. I think, you probably have another, at least 3 to 5 years out of them before you have to come up with a longer-term solution. And that's all being looked at as part of the larger comprehensive facility study. That'll come forward as well.
Okay, thank you.
Laura?
Just a couple of questions. The first one is for Mr. Souza. So basically, if after we retire those 2 bonds next year, we would still be borrowing, our first payment would still be more than what those 2 by significant. How would we absorb the rest of that amount?
Right, to answer your question, the first year payment would be more by, I believe, a couple $100,000 than the savings that we're going to have by retiring.
It starts to come in, but it takes several years before you get there.
Right.
You're looking at almost 7, 8 years before so we're still borrowing more than what's currently we're retiring. So this is still, would be
Right, it
more
would be
money on.
right, for a temporary term, we would be, our debt would be increasing, but then over time, we feel most of it will be able to be absorbed by the, by the savings. What we would look to is, there are, we may have some flexibility in the budget. We also, there was a new law that was passed this year with the Municipal Modernization Act that may allow a town to, the bond premiums that we receive when we issue bonds, we may be able to apply that now. Before, we were very restricted on what we could do with those. We may be able to apply some of those towards the debt service. So as long as we stay in this, the interest rate environment and the bond market that we're in, we feel that would be a benefit as well.
Thank you.
And that's what we talked about earlier, in terms of this extra growth in the levy capacity, and that will help us absorb it as we get through that cycle as well.
Oh, you want to go back to that? Because that was sort of my next question.
Sure.
So we have this money that goes towards our unused levy capacity. What is the process of, how does the town tap into that excess capacity should it need it in the future? Just
Town meeting appropriation. It's a town meeting vote. In other words, it doesn't go away. If you don't use the excess capacity, it doesn't go away. And because you're below the 2.5 levy limit, you don't need a ballot question or debt exclusion or operational override. So the manner of addressing that capacity is a form of a town meeting appropriation.
So would this be considered usage of the excess levy right now for this?
Exactly. So
Okay.
it won't happen this year because, again, what'll happen is if town meeting does the appropriation for the 7.9 million, what would happen is there'd be a procurement process, there'd be construction, preparation, site work. You probably would take delivery sometime in the late spring, early summer, and so forth. So again, when in fact, we're probably talking about doing a borrowing in June to do that, so that way, before the end of the fiscal year, we borrow the books. But again, that borrowing in June, you won't have your first principal and interest payments until the subsequent fiscal year. So that's why we're saying that's what I was saying to Bob's question earlier, you won't have that utilization in this current fiscal year. But again, our job is to look for the long-term sustainability, and as John noted, we feel that with the excess levy capacity and some of the aspects of going forward in the community, that we will basically be able to. We don't foresee any kind of any kind of an excluded question or override or other type of issue, in the foreseeable future, and that's where that 5-year financial forecast will be presented at town meeting next month. So basically, we're well positioned, and it was sort of like I said, the timing actually works out well. We're actually sort of a year ahead in terms of what we saw in terms of the effort. So we're well positioned to move forward and to absorb that. And again, the other cost that's going to take place, and the superintendent mentioned it earlier, is when you now then have the facility and you're opening the school to full-day kindergarten next fall, you then have the operational costs of about $800,000 or so dollars, for the instructors and heat and lights and so forth for the operations. So again, that's what happens. So, and what you quickly see is that excess capacity is totally used up, and then probably, as John noted, probably a couple $100,000 probably short, because of the fact that, you just figure it out, $800,000 in debt service, $800,000 in operational costs, so forth. There's $1.6 million, and you saw the presentation from the assessors earlier in terms of that excess levy capacity. So this excess levy capacity is a one-time situation we foresee for the current fiscal year. But again, long-term, we see that it goes away. And therefore, you also sort of see this when we get to the question about using cash to reduce the levy. This year, we're proposing $500,000. There's a reason why we're not using more than that, because, again, we want something that's sustainable going forward because of that same concern, that we may not, we've got to be mindful, and you'll see this later on in our presentation in a few moments. There are some sort of warning signs or concerns out there that we're seeing, particularly in the state budget, and that has us pausing a little bit, as well as other communities, in terms of what's going to happen with local aid in the upcoming year. Because right now, as we've seen, and we'll also talk about it in our motor vehicle excise revenues and even in the hotel tax, we're seeing some contraction for various reasons. And I think that's why, again, we're mindful of the fact of not overextending ourselves. Because I think what we saw in the community was, if you go back a dozen or so years ago, that sort of, guided optimism sort of was met with a difficult reality, and we do not want to go into that situation. And what would happen there is again, you'd be using your reserves to pay debt service, and then that would get you into a spiral where the town would endanger its bond rating and so forth. And again, the community went through that through the early to middle part of the last decade, and we're trying not to repeat that history right now.
Thank you.
Sal, I guess.
Well, I just want to say a couple of things. First of all, I want to thank everyone being here, and I appreciate the questions that are now being talked about in reference to full-day K. You know, when I hear conversations about, maybe the older kids are going to be in the modulars, or I hear an understanding that as a result of the 11,000 new homes that are being constructed in 2015 that have been inspected, that people are moving into our community. Well, we know why they're moving into our community. One of the biggest reasons is the education that their kids receive, and that's a draw to move into the town of Chelmsford. So all I can say is, from a school board perspective, we appreciate it. We thank you. We think this is critical for our kids. Just imagine our children right now, today, tomorrow you have kids that are going to have lessons that are taught in hallways outside their classrooms. You have programs in elementary schools that are being, I don't want to say cut, but they're being changed as a result of no space. This solves all this. Your kids are going to have a better quality education from the earliest part of the foundation that is needed in them. And it's a result of some of the questions and some of the things that are being talked about. So to Paul's point, this is the right time to make a big difference. And with 11,000 new homes just in 2015 being inspected, I think this is an opportunity for us. And I see on one of the next slides and on page 15, 9,000 homes, 2,600 condos have been inspected in 2015. Is that accurate, Paul?
Yes, that's what the assessment.
That's exactly right.
Okay, so what does that say? People are moving into our community.
I'm glad you brought up the space. That was another question I had, and I'm sorry I didn't ask this to the consultants, but it came up, I thought about it afterward, is why did the pods come out to 3 per school and not 2 per school if we are just adding the kindergarten part? So are we doing something else with the 3rd pod, or how does that work out?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. That had gotten flushed out during one of the discussions around the long-term student enrollment needs. And if you look at the trend, we are seeing the decline at the upper grade levels, but at the elementary school grade levels, and even this year, we're seeing some higher numbers than usual. You are going to see an uptick in the student enrollment at the elementary grade level, and then that's going to flow up through the system. So the extra classroom, if you want to think about it that way, is really the kind of flex space, I think is what they called it, to be able to handle the capacity 10 years out. I believe they looked at the 10-year figure and figured out what the actual enrollment was going to be midway through the cycle, because you didn't want to put in just, say, 2 classrooms if you were within 10 years going to need a 3rd because of the construction costs and just the way they do all the site work and whatnot. So they were using the projection for the 10 years out.
Once again, Selectmen, I really appreciate those questions, because I think it's an opportunity for everybody in the town to understand that this is really needed now, and this is the right time. And with the influx of kids that we're having, and the fact that the kids are either in hallways or programs are being affected, this is the right move to make.
So all that was another question I had, was with all of the discussion on the first meeting about the kids in the hallways, how is that being addressed by this putting in all-day, full-day kindergarten? Because it seems that all we're doing is dealing with the kindergarten problem, not however many sessions there are during any point during the day that people are in hallways or in closets, or what was the fallout for all of that, and why are we not addressing that immediately?
You're right.
I mean, it's very concerning, and it was very worrisome for the parents of that.
No one's in closets. So what they're in is in little hallways and things like that. If you like, at South Row, I was there the other day, and if you're walking down the back hallway towards the library, there are little offshoots between the classrooms that you'll see, like a circular table, and a teacher will be doing some pull-out instruction or a little extra work on with the students. This, unfortunately, still doesn't address that issue. Those issues around space needs and just the expanding population for all grade levels, particularly at the elementary school level, are going to be tackled in part of the larger comprehensive study, the larger facility plan. And that's why when we get to the next article, over the next number of years, the town is going to have to think about adding some more capacity as the enrollment starts to increase again. So we probably are going to be looking at in the not short-term, not for next year, but in the next, again, 5, 10 years, doing some kind of a new school building project or a significant expansion-type school building project. And that's what we're going to need the MSBA's assistance with. But the scenario you mentioned is not addressed by this
So
scenario.
parents should
This is-
continue to expect that will be the norm for the next 5 to 10 years foreseeable, just based from what I'm hearing.
In some grade levels, yes, unfortunately, because of the space issues in the schools. Now, there's nothing to say that, if we do add, say, next year, one of the particular schools, the 3 classrooms for the K, and we only need the 2, well,
Yeah.
then that's going to be an extra classroom that could be repurposed for space. Again, it might mean someone's going, a regular classroom is going to be in the modular to free up a building space within the building. But that's going to provide us a little bit of flexibility. So I don't want to say nothing will happen, but, it's not going to solve everyone's problems up front. This will address the full day K implementation issue and give us a little bit of wiggle room to begin to address some of the other problems. But most of them are going to have to be tackled in a larger facility plan.
Thank you.
Glenn, you've been patiently waiting.
What's the lead time to obtain a modular classroom?
Again, if this were approved actually in fall town meeting, we're going to be cutting it close. This is going to have to be a major focus of our work. You've got to get in the queue to be able to actually have your modulars manufactured right after the first of the year. So assuming this is approved at town meeting, this is going to be the major emphasis of our work throughout the course of the fall. We need to be working with contractors and architects and putting bid documents together so that right after January 1st, we're actually hitting the road to bid. They need to be manufactured. There is some site work that has to happen over the summer for them to be in place. It's going to be a crunch. It's going to be a lot of work to make this happen, but it can happen, yeah.
Where do they get manufactured?
I honestly don't know.
And would Public Works be involved in the procurement, ordering?
Oh, yes. Gary and Kathleen from Public Works, they're going to be a principal player in this, working with us. The school department would advise on like the educational kind of needs of the building, but DPW would take the lead on the facility itself.
Right. One of the reasons years ago, it must be a half dozen now, I think Pat was on the board at the time, we established a permanent building committee so that you had that expertise and that ongoing familiarity with the process. Right now, that committee is finishing up the work over at the library annex building. And so their path is clear. So once this gets approved at town meeting, and again, you have input and membership on that committee from the superintendent and others, and also, the facilities, Gary Perschetti, Kathleen Canavan, and then that committee has managed several projects such as the fire station, DPW, town halls, and so forth. They're equipped and prepared to move forward so that you don't have that kind of a learning curve where, gee, we've never done one of these projects, how do we proceed, and so forth. So, yes, it will be, but I think as Jay noted, it's going to be a very challenging schedule, and we'll do the best that we can, but obviously we're highly motivated to get it done.
If it does not pass at town meeting, will early kindergarten be off for next year because you just won't have the time?
If this plan doesn't pass, we really wouldn't have a backup.
Well, not that it might not pass subsequently, but if it doesn't pass in this time frame, let's say there's a special town meeting to address some deficiency and they just want to see something, it would be not enough time to implement it at that point, would there be? It's now or it's off.
I think that's probably correct. Yeah, because
For the September.
realistically, if we're at the end of October when fall town meeting ends. If you're not resetting, you're now after the first of the year realistically, and then you've run out of time. I mean, you're not going to be able to pull this off in a 7-month window to basically be moving teachers and such into space in August, the end of August. It's going to be challenging as it is right now. But if you were to lose 2 months, because what happens. You pick up the pieces at the end of October and you start looking at trying to schedule a town meeting in December and so forth because you're moving around the Thanksgiving holiday and so forth. And as you said, you've got to do the procurement and their efforts. You're now into February and so forth, and you're not going to pull it off in 6 months because you're not going to get the units, quite frankly.
I just had 2 questions. One's actually for Anita. You made a comment, 4.25% interest is good. It's a good rate. Is that historically good, or is this something that you would
Well,
not?
we're at all-time low rates, right?
Okay.
So this is when we should be investing in the town, in our infrastructure. And
Okay.
not wait for the interest rate to be 8% and it cost our taxpayers more money.
Right.
Right? I mean, I'm actually disappointed, I mean, not disappointed, I appreciate the modular classrooms. I wish we were redoing a school building. I mean, this is the time for the infrastructure. Our schools are, not the best shape. I wish the town, would pony up and, say, yeah, it's time we decide to do a full project and we start looking at each school and spend the money when borrowing is cheap. And then what's gonna happen? In 10 years, it's gonna be double and it's gonna cost us more money.
Thank you. And my second question is, and I'm going to ask this, and I want an answer in layman terms, because not everybody speaks government, right? So there's people at home maybe watching, and there's probably people reading the newspaper. So what you're saying is if this passes through town meeting, we don't have to raise taxes on residents?
Well, because when you say that, when you put it that way, it sounds like people's taxes are not going to go up. And as Strat knows, they go up every year.
Let me let me rephrase. We will not have to go to a debt exclusion or an
Right.
override.
We will not have to go to the ballot to to receive an exclusion from Proposition 2.5 for either the debt or the operational costs. That's
Thank you.
correct. But that is not to say that your taxes won't go up.
For this
They always
project.
go up.
Well,
you're
well,
just
I mean,
asking that
it-
any raise in the taxes is not a direct correlation.
Well,
Right, that's what
it's
I'm
part of-
asking.
It's part of
Is
the
this
spending,
project-
and that was,
Well, it's
I think that was Laura's point
It'll-
earlier. But if you didn't have this project, the taxes wouldn't go up as much because you have excess capacity.
They might even go down
Right,
if we
because-
weren't
right.
continuing
So,
to add to our
so again, if you, let's,
capital.
I
So
saw that.
right, let's recognize, we're spending $7.9 million, plus we're
Which
gonna
is
increase the
more than
operating.
we were spending this
And we're gonna
past
be
year.
increasing the operating budget 800,000+ per year, so there is that increase, and as the rule of thumb we always use is every $1 million we spend is about $70 on the average single-family tax bill, which
But
right
this
now
is-
is over $6,500.
But this is
no,
a
it's
con-
not going to the ballot.
It's not going to go to the ballot, and it's a conservative plan. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yes.
Right. It sounds well thought out. It
Yes.
sounds like you thought out the interest rates are right.
Right.
And it just sounds like the right time to do it.
Right. The challenge that Anita is looking for, and that's the next article, is it takes about 6 years to go do a permanent
Right.
project,
Right.
major
We're
project.
getting-
And
yeah.
goodness knows what the interest rates would be 6 years from now.
Yeah,
I
and the-
agree with you.
And the one thing that we're not looking at is the rate of return residents get on their property values
Right.
by having full-day kindergarten. That's the one piece that we're not including in this. So for
students in the classroom.
Well, yeah, but I mean, as, property values go up, we all benefit from, as citizens. So if I have to get $35 back, I'd rather, keep that in the town and get $1,000 back in an increase in property value from it's my biggest investment, my house.
But
So-
to play devil's advocate on that, the usual argument for the other side is with an increase in value in the properties, an increase in taxes for that.
So every year, my property increases,
But
I
I'd
pay more,
rather,
but I'm not
it
going to
than
cash in
when,
for 30 or 40
I
years.
retire and I get to go and sell my house and go on, and downsize and.
But I think this
take
also
nice
ties
vacations.
in, I think this ties into Article 129, which is coming up later. It's addressing that increase in a different way.
But it doesn't necessarily always mean that you only get the cash out when you sell your home. I mean, people refinance their home all the time to send their kids through college, to make improvements in
Absolutely.
the quality of life, so.
An increase in equity.
Exactly, so as you increase your equity, you increase your borrowing capacity in order to live a better quality of life.
Life, yeah.
So I just want to make one last point, is that whether we do this now, at this town meeting or not, eventually, some hotshot legislator down on the Hill is going to say, wow, we're at 98% for the state, for the Commonwealth. I'm going to pass a law. And then we're going to get everybody to be mandatory on full-day kindergarten, and we're going to have to do it on the state's terms. We have a really good opportunity to do it now on Chelmsford terms.
Glenn, you've been waiting patiently.
Yeah, I would think, and this is for Dr. Lang, that someone at town meeting is liable to bring up the question, we're doing this, it's a good plan, but we have no idea of what the real plan is. What's the permanent solution, and how is that going to affect me as a taxpayer? Any idea when that plan is going to come up and the kind of dollars that are associated with it?
Yes, there won't actually be overall dollars associated with it because it's down the line. Would it be okay if we touched
Sure,
on the
we can go
next
to the next
article at the
article,
same time? Would it be all right if I kind of brought it up under that?
Before we jump onto that, could we just talk about operational cost increase for full-day kindergarten? Because that kind of ties into the current article we're on right now. Do we have a set figure about approximate where we're going to be?
Yeah, well, I think Paul had mentioned like that $800,000 figure, and that's, the $800,000 is basically going to provide for the staffing for the additional classrooms in year one. We're still trying to quantify exactly what, like, just some one-time, like, furniture and things like that, setup costs would be. I wouldn't think that that was more than, you know, a couple $100,000. That's not megabucks, and that's more one-time money. It's going to be about at least $800,000 a year, I would say, would be what the staffing is to add into the model.
Yeah, and that's why I speak of recurring costs. When he's talking the one-time cost, that could come from like school choice monies or so forth, a available funding source for the schools. So that, but that wouldn't be an annual cost, which is the key.
And is that $800,000 figure just for operational for the school? Does that also include the town expenses, such as the healthcare costs, the increase in employment costs? What does that number look like, approximately?
I mean, eight is really, primarily me. I don't know if you had 100,000 set aside for.
That's probably would be in terms of the number of people doing benefits. You've got probably about 125,000 or so.
Okay. So looking at 925.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Now, Glenn's question, you were asking.
Yeah,
about
so the
Sorry. Oops. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So the next warrant article we wanted to talk about was asking for, this is one-time money, to basically help us, now that we're going to have the comprehensive facility assessment, and we will have a report out in early to mid-October on that. So we actually have a final planning meeting tomorrow, the working group that's been working on the project with the architect, now that we gave them direction with regard to the kindergarten option that we wanted them to incorporate. So now they're going back to kind of retool and finalize their overarching report. And that we will have minimally kind of a final draft by early October, and they will come, it was listed as me on the agenda for the opening, but I'm going to ask them to give a few-minute overview of the project as well. But just to give town meeting reps kind of the global idea of where we're going, again, they're not going to be presenting us with the final solution for the long term, because that's actually something that the state likes to participate in. So what we're trying to do with this kind of one-time $40,000, hopefully through free cash, would be able to have, say, Dora and Whittier continue to work with us and put an application into the SBA next March, April timeframe to at least get into the pipeline for a possible future capital project with the town. We know that if we actually submit a project next March or April, it's going to be at least a year to be reviewed, and then you may be invited into, depending on other needs and competing interests with other communities, you then might be invited into this process that can take anywhere from 1 to 2 years of kind of vetting and report writing and analysis with the SBA. So you can be about 3 years before you actually get engaged with them on a project. And even at that point, they like to come in and they actually weigh heavily on what your final decision is, because in a situation like Chelmsford, they're going to be reimbursing about 50 or 55% of the project. So, let's say you did do a $30 million school building project. We want to get 15 or 16 million paid by the town. When you look at, excuse me?
Paid by the state.
Paid by the state. But when you look at your interest rates, again, if you're only paying, your 4 or 5% interest rate on half of a major capital project, that's a huge benefit to the town. But we're never even going to be in for consideration with the state unless we start to go through the process and at least get into the pipeline. And all of the other communities in the area and beyond have at least a project in the pipeline. So I think the $40,000 would allow us to at least start to engage the SBA in the conversation. And unfortunately, the earliest that conversation is going to be a couple of years down the line. But if we don't at least start now and kind of strike while the iron is hot, and we actually have the overarching facility assessment, that's going to benefit us going in with the SBA, because they're going to know that we're taking this very seriously, we've done a due diligence, we have a report together, and we want to eventually talk to them about doing a project. There's absolutely no vote of the town at this point in time, aside from just the $40,000 on the project, because I honestly couldn't tell you what that project would be. And they would want to be involved in that decision-making. But if we don't at least take that first step and submit an application next spring, we're never going to get in the pipeline. And I think that's my concern long-term, that there will be another pressing need out there. And I would much rather be in a situation where we can leverage 50% reimbursement from the state, hopefully plus positive interest rates at that point in time.
So is the 40,000 an adder all for the present consultant?
It doesn't necessarily have to be the present consultant, but I'll be quite honest with you, I've been incredibly impressed with their work that they've done in this project, and they have pulled together all of this data and information for us. It might actually be more costly if we went with a new group and they had to come in and actually kind of start up and read through all the reports that have been done. I would personally like to speak with the existing group and see if we could amend their existing contract to help us with the application, because they're so familiar with that project.
So will the 40,000 be to the conclusion, or is it just, you'll write some language that it'll be for these steps, and then when those steps are achieved, there may be an additional adder for some additional work?
Once we actually submit the SBA application, that would be to get us up through the submission in March. And then we're actually just in a holding pattern. So our engagement with them would end when we submit in March. Then we're probably looking at a good year before we came on board. And at that point in time, if we're going to work with the SBA on a project or even a preliminary study, they make you go through a totally separate project process to procure an owner's project manager or an architect. So the group that's working with us right now, even if they wanted to be considered, would have to go through a different competition almost. And the SBA also weighs in on that because they want to approve your OPM and your architects for your project. But the 40,000 would get us through the spring, and then that would basically conclude the services once the application was submitted to the SBA. Laura?
Yes, I guess I didn't understand that when we voted for the $200,000, and with all the assessment meetings that I attended, I didn't realize that we would go to the end of the process and still not have anything close to some final recommendations. So we are going to just submit an application for a project, and then the state comes in and tells us what we should do, even though we just went through this $200,000 study, or how does that apply
No, the
to this
$200,000.
application?
Yeah, the $200,000 study is going to provide us with, again, it's been a huge list of options, and we've kind of narrowed it down to maybe 2 or 3 or 4 viable solutions might come out of this, and that's really a local decision. So when Durham Whittier leave us in October, if we didn't do this additional step, then they would leave us with kind of a master plan with 2, 3, 4 different paths to take, and then that would be the community's decision with what to do.
So will that be presented to the community?
Yes.
Okay, was my question.
No, that will be presented to the community, but I'm just saying that we're not at the point where we say, we absolutely need a new elementary school, or we need a new middle school, or a high school. They're giving us just different scenarios that we can actually consider. But that'll be presented.
Just like they did with the full-day kindergarten.
Correct.
Right.
And that'll be presented in minimally, kind of almost final draft form in that early to mid-October timeframe. What you have to do with the MSBA in the spring is you don't actually bring forward a project to them. So they have this process called the Statement of Interest, and it basically, you have to put together an application from the community that talks about your existing education system, your existing buildings, the positives, the negatives, and you basically ask their assistance for their help to work with you on a project. I mean, we're going to have the Durham Whittier study as backup, as proof and evidence that, we would like to work with them, and we have some needs we're identifying. We're identifying some space issues. So we're not going to come out and say it's a particular school that needs help, but we're going to say we need the SBA to work with us because over the next 5 or 10 years, we have space issues. So that's when they're going to want to get involved and actually take a look at the different work that Durham Whittier has done and help us pick a solution that is cost-effective, that they can get in support because they have limited resources as well. But it's called the Statement of Interest process. I don't want you to think that the Durham Whittier group isn't going to leave us in good shape. They certainly are, and they're going to have kind of the master plan that we can adopt. I think the other thing that's missing, or might be missing, is even though we have the Durham Whittier plan and we want to do an MSBA project eventually, in the interim, the Durham Whittier study is also going to provide us with good documentation for the town's capital planning. So the year-to-year projects that we try to complete, they're actually helping us roadmap that.
Right.
And so that's going to be very valuable information to have. And they'll also, when we actually kind of pick a solution that we want to work on, whether it's independent or whether it's working with the SBA, they'll help us kind of timeline and phase when we should do that work to be able to access potential funding and reimbursements. So it's been very good work, and I think I'll have a much better picture by early to mid-October of what it's looking like.
Great. I think that people will be wanting to see that at the same time, or maybe prior to when they're voting for, to
Yep, and
put
what
this money in.
I hope is that it's very clear that the kindergarten piece is just a piece of the larger plan. And again, I will have them come to town meeting and give just kind of the high-level overview of where they are at that time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, let's move on to the next article. Article 7 pertains to the 101 Mill Road property. Many of you may recall, it was 2 years ago at Fall Town Meeting, the town acquired that site. Last week, the Board of Selectmen received a presentation from Bill Griffin and other representatives of the 101 Mill Road Committee. They're basically looking to come forward with they've come forward with a financial request of $20,000 to engage the appropriate resources to plan and navigate the use of the 101 Mill Road site for events. We had a very engaging conversation with the committee, and I think town meeting will probably have a similar engaging discussion in terms of how we can maximize the use of that site, also bearing in mind the adjoining properties, some of which are town-owned, such as the conservation land and soccer fields, as well as the nonprofit at 99 Mill Road, the old mill. So we anticipate that there'll be a discussion at town meeting, and perhaps an appropriation, or more importantly, a direction in terms of where does the community feel we should be going. And I think ultimately, from this, there probably will be a final resolution at Springtown meeting in terms of where to proceed. There have been discussions since our meeting last Monday night with members of the 99 Mill Road Trust in terms of, could there be a benefit of the properties being joined together in terms of common ownership and so forth. So again, I think that will be the discussion under this article at town meeting. The next article is a request having to do with handicap accessibility improvements to the doors at the senior center. And fortunately, we'll be meeting at the senior center, so people may have a refresher of what it's like there. But working with the Disabilities Commission and the Council on Aging, we need to install 10 automatic door openers at the senior center. And as noted, one for each of the bathrooms on the first and floor and lower level, as well as the interior door to the porch cafe and the exterior door to the ramp. And then there's also a garden exterior door at the far end of the first floor hall, then the cafe door to the deck. Basically, it's sort of the same thing with changing codes and so forth. Those doors are heavy, they're not automatic, and so what often finds is a person with needs comes there, they can get the automatic doors open at the beginning, but that's basically as far as they can get. They do need assistance to utilize other portions and areas of the building, such as the bathroom. So this is a rather modest request to address that because the other alternative, if we didn't fund it now, it wouldn't get done until next summer. And so we really want to get moving on that again, in our effort to be handicapped accessible and also to make it an effective facility. The next article is another significant article, and this has to do with the ongoing and often delayed relocation of all the public works over to the Alpha Road site. Many of you are aware we still provide the DPW maintenance operations over on Richardson Road. We originally had a plan a couple years ago to bring it across, and then we had other financial challenges in the community, and that got shelved. So right now, we're coming forward with the request to obtain an appropriation of $1.186 million to deal with the housing of the exterior shell of the facility to eventually relocate the maintenance operations over there. So that's why we call this Phase 1. And what's involved with it, it's significant structural modifications to the building. We have to raise a 6,000 square foot portion of the roof and roof structure in order to support the large vehicles, which obviously go on lifts and so forth, which that current building cannot meet because of the height limitations. We also then have to deal with the grade where these vehicles would be maintained because they do not have, the proper grade and floor plumbing and associated sanitary drainage and so forth. We also have to provide appropriate door openings for the new overhead doors in terms of height and width and as well as the purchase and installation of these doors. And then, again, when you're doing these modifications, you have to address the fire suppression system that's out there, because that gets modified with these changes, lighting and other associated work. So that sort of would sort of encompass the shell, and then we'd come back at a future meeting to deal with the interior fit-out and the actual maintenance equipment, such as the lifts and other equipment that would go on there. And that's about a similar cost in the future in order to fully provide this facility. So this is our effort here, is to continue to gradually get ourselves in a position. But I think, as John noted, and we heard some other earlier comments this evening, we're not proposing to take on additional debt to do that, because we are mindful of the town's debt burden as we move forward. So that's what takes place here in terms of the allocation of the free cash. And there's also a portion, $900,000 comes from the general fund free cash, and as Darlene noted, we also have a undesignated fund balance, or sewer enterprise free cash, and we would take the $286,000 from that portion, because roughly it's about a 25% of operational cost the sewer is for total DPW, and that's how we would fund this next phase. Yes.
How many more phases after this? Approximately, do we know?
Well, it depends if you want to go to full build-out. If you want to go out to full build-out in terms of the wash bays, the fueling islands, we probably have what I would say is about, you'd probably need about 4 phases. I'm not sure we're ever going to get there, Matt, but clearly we're running into an issue now with operational, in terms of the fact that, we have vehicles and personnel and staff in one building, and then we have the mechanics across town. But if you were to go and look at everything that was on the original list from when we acquired the property, you'd need about another $8.2 million. And as I said, we may never get there, because, the wash bay itself is $3.25 million. And we may never ever get a wash bay, because that's a significant investment. But I think there are some that we have to do. We have to finish this vehicle maintenance. We also have to put a leveling, a finishing coat of pavement on that site. That's still the original binder coat that's over there, and that cost for the top coat pavement's about $140,000. So this, you can see the numbers vary depending on that. Also, there's an interior portion that we never fit out the office part. Is if you go in the front door, all the office spaces to the left, there's also a portion to the right that was never finished. And then, as we said, also the question of the fueling island. Right now, we fuel everything over at the police department. If you remember, we went to town meeting, we had to reconstruct the concrete base of that because
I have
of that.
pictures of it. It was a mess.
Exactly. So that's what I'm saying. So that's realistically in the big picture. But like I said, will we ever fully get there? No. But from an operational component, it's clear our effort is to at least get all the men and maintenance over there, and then that would actually free up the Richardson Road site in terms of day-to-day activity, in terms of having your department fractured. And
Will this get maintenance over here, even though this says phase 1, or will
No.
it be just one
No.
more phase just to get maintenance?
you'll need another
over?
phase to get over there.
Okay.
So in essence, you're saying we're gonna spend 1.1 million and not be able to use it until the next phase?
Well, you wouldn't be able to use it for its intended purpose. I mean, you'll still be able to use it, but you're not going to be doing maintenance over there. You would still store equipment and vehicles, so forth, but you're not going to be able to use the full maintenance until you spend, probably by the time we get to it, probably another $1.8 million to get the full fit out equipment and everything over there. But I don't see it as a lost opportunity if we never get there, because again, that's our permanent home. We're eventually going to get there. I mean, we'll, as far as we can see, we will be at Public Works for the next generation or so, and this is basically a way of gradually getting ourselves over there without basically taking on a significant debt burden.
And Paul, can you tell us, you recall what the cost was 2 years ago for this project? I know I'm asking you to do a lot with that, but I know it's increased, obviously.
Right, no, it increases, it was about 5.8,
Gary?
a few years ago. And the problem is we're now, and sort of goes to Anita's comment, we were in a very favorable bidding market a few years ago. That bidding market is not very favorable, as we see by escalation costs. But again, who knows where we'll be as this thing moves forward. But you're right. That's the delay that's the danger of delay. Is your costs
That's a
go up.
real delay that we saw. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, Glenn.
So, am I correct that there will still be some maintenance function at the present site?
All maintenance functions.
Well, no, I'm saying there will still be some DPW workers or work to be done at the old site.
Oh, yes. We will not be able to relocate them over there till we complete all phases of the maintenance project.
Is there expected any environmental remediation going to be required at that site?
No, no. We right now, and I want to assure people, that site has been inspected, re-inspected, and analyzed. We are in full environmental compliance over there. There are detention basins and capture systems. There is no risk to either the site or the adjoining wells of the water district by our continued presence over there. So it's not as though what we have over there is a deficient site. It just isn't a site that allows for the efficient operations of the department. Okay. The next article is, would be to take a portion of the town's free cash for $500,000 to reduce the fiscal year 2007 property tax levy. The projected property tax levy for the year that we're in now, where we'll be sending actual bills out at the end of December, is $93.7 million in property tax. A year ago, we appropriated $293,572 of the $2.2 million in free cash to reduce the levy. This year, we're sort of requesting an appropriation of $500,000 of the $2.45 million in free cash to reduce the levy. The impact of this, sort of the question earlier, I mean, again, you got to bear in mind, we've got a $93.7 million levy, and the tax bill is over $6,500. The impact of about $500,000 is about $35 per average single-family bill. So it's like I said, it's not $1 a week. It's 75 cents a week or what have you. But again, I think it shows a good faith balance, an effort that we're mindful of the levy and the impacts of what's going on in the economy. And as you know, this has sort of been an annual discussion and balancing of priorities in terms of how do we meet sort of just the article we spoke of. Could they use, the extra $500,000 there, or do we do this? And again, we're trying to strike a balance here, mindful of the diverse opinions and perspectives, not only on the boards, but also in the community. So that is sort of our effort here with the $500,000.
That $35 can go to pay for the increase in gas tax. To pay for the increase in the gas.
In the gas.
For the cars.
Gas is going down.
Gas going.
It's supposed to go up.
It's gonna go up.
Anyway.
Paul,
Yes, Laura.
I'm going to repeat my question from earlier.
Yep.
As we apply this money to the tax levy, how does this affect the tax ceiling? Could potentially this all go away because we find we are in dire need, or does this affect does our tax ceiling go down with it?
No, it does not go down. The limits under Proposition 2.5 are your cap, your ceiling. What you actually appropriate under that does not affect the next year's ceiling. So if this year we end the year with the ability of we're below the levy limit, next year levy limit remains the same, and it grows by 2.5% plus new growth. So the fact that we apply the $500,000 does not mean that next year we couldn't absorb that into the increase. And that's the concern. That's why the balance about how much is sustainable. We're hopeful, again, recognizing there's some unknowns, particularly at the state revenue aspect, that that we could carry this going forward. But you're right. And the problem that becomes is you then get hit with the absorption of that in this case $500,000 plus your regular 2.5% increase, and then you get
a large jump for
exactly.
that year, and
Right.
the taxpayers all fall over.
But I've often heard in this community they would rather take that in the immediacy rather than sort of having us expend that money on an ongoing basis. So that's why we do that. But you're correct. You do recognize the fact that you could have a bit of an increase above 2.5% because of the fact you're utilizing the unused levy capacity.
Thank you.
The next article is the General Stabilization Fund at Article 11. And here we're proposing a transfer of $747,861 from free cash to the General Stabilization Fund. Right now, if the General Stabilization Fund balance is $8.75 million. As I mentioned, we're asking for $750,000 transfer in, but I think there's two things to bear in mind is this is conformance with two aspects. One is the town's overall financial policy is to maintain a general stabilization fund balance of between 5 and 10% of the town's operating budget. And if you apply what ultimately would be about $250,000 to this balance, the balance would be 9.25 million, which roughly comes out to 7.5% of the town's $123 million budget. The question of, well, where does the balance of the money go, the 500,000 of this? That is the amount they were putting aside to fund future collective bargaining agreements. Under our charter, we're not able to appropriate to departments in the general government side any money in advance of an actual contract settlement. But we also recognize that there likely would be costs once we do reach settlement, and we saw this several months ago when after 2.5 years, we've settled 2 police contracts. We had to go back and fund a significant retroactive increase for the prior fiscal years. So what this does is we put the money into the stabilization fund, and then at a future date, after the tax rate is set in December, if we're at town meeting next April, we then would fund, if there is a retroactive adjustment, that from the stabilization fund, and then as we prepare the upcoming fund budget, we would then fund that from the new levy. So basically, we're setting aside those funds, recognizing the fact that we've got 9 unions out without contracts, and so that's what's taking place under this article. If you don't do it, like you said, then you're basically drawing into your reserves, and then again, you've got to meet that obligation going forward. So that's what's taking place under this article in the community. And then the last financial article of funds, and this pertains to the Chelmsford Forum, it's Article 12. We're asking for $55,000 to be used for some structural repairs at the Chelmsford Forum. And this came out of an action from a town meeting a year ago where, as we're nearing the end of our special legislation in 2018, June of 2018, we have the option of acting under that special legislation of which to acquire the property. And part of the acquisition is we need to have obtained an appraisal, and part of the appraisal effort was to have a structural analysis of the building. When the structural engineers went out there after the forum closed for the season, they went up and went into the roofs and behind the walls and so forth. They found that at somewhere along the lines of this 50-year-old facility, that at the lower level of the long end side of the building, someone had removed some of the steel rod X bracing that basically braces a structure against wind and seismic loads. And the term X becomes those tubes that you see that cross brace. So obviously that's a significant safety issue, and we want to get this done before winter snow loads and so forth come in. So we're asking for the $55,000 to undertake these repairs, so that that we can obviously ensure that's a safe facility going forward. And again, that $55,000 comes from the Forum Special Maintenance Fund, which is under the special legislation, in which 30% of the revenues have to go towards the ongoing maintenance of the building. So again, that has no impact on the tax levy because, again, that's a dedicated special fund that comes from the management and operation by the private entity, in this case of the Chelmsford Forum. So that's what takes place there. We then move to the other major article on the warrant, and that has to do with the 129 Industrial Area Amenities Overlay District. The planning board is continuing its hearings and discussions on this, so we anticipate we'll have a presentation before the Board of Selectmen in the next week or two as the planning board sort of winds down its recommendations, and then they'll be going to the Finance Committee as well. But in essence, I think everybody around the table knows about this effort. We've discussed it here before. It's the idea of updating our zoning on the 129 corridor with today's market needs and challenges. The short vernacular is the amenities issue in terms of how do we provide amenities in the corridor, and that requires a zoning change. And then obviously there have been discussions on terms of building height and buffer zones and so forth. And again, I would invite folks who continue to have concerns to reach out to the planning board and obviously attend the hearings on this. So that that will be a significant discussion, most likely probably taking place as we head into the second night of town meeting on Thursday, the 20th. Article 14 is a quick amendment to the town general bylaws. We have a provision in our animal bylaw that limits the number of dogs in a kennel, kenneled premises to 25. We've had a request from a commercial kennel in town to increase it to 100. We also reached out to the other veterinary and other kennels in towns, and the feedback we got that was that 25 was a bit restrictive. So the request will be for 100 at town meeting. Regardless of the kennel size, it's not a by right. Every kennel in the community has to obtain a special permit from the planning board. So any expansion would require planning board special permit review, as well as Board of Health sanitary review. So we don't want people to think that we're allowing for puppy mills in town. What's going on here is the ability to allow for increased expansion on these locations. And again, if you look at these locations, I said earlier, they range from the animal hospitals that are in the community, as well as a place like PetSmart, on Chelmsford Street, that house animals. So that's what's taking place there. And then the last article on the warrant is an acceptance of state statute regarding the disposition of abandoned funds. And I'll let John describe this one as a state acceptance.
Sure, just to explain to everyone, municipalities in the Commonwealth is basically have two choices of dealing with abandoned funds. And what we're talking about here is, as you can imagine, each year the town issues thousands of checks to vendors and et cetera. There's a small percentage every fiscal year that go uncashed, so that's what we're talking about here. Non-deposited, they're basically people either forget about the check or lose it. The two choices are you can either report the funds to the state treasurer, or the procedure that we've always followed, many other towns follow, is under this section of state law, you have to send the owner of the check a letter by first-class mail to the last known address. You also have to place legal ads in a local newspaper and on the town website. And the benefit to the town of doing the latter procedure is if at the end of a 14-month period, the funds are still unclaimed, they revert to the town's general fund. We've always followed this procedure. Just in doing some research with town council, we found that the town had never actually accepted this statute, and this area of law had been amended a few years back. So that's why I brought it forward at this time.
John, do we have printed on our checks, check not valid over 90 days or something?
Yes, when the law was amended a few years back, on all town checks right above the area where it has my signature, there's a thing there's a phrase, and it says void if not cashed within 1 year from date of issue. So they have a year from the time that we issue the check. The party has a year to cash it or deposit it. Then after that period, that's when this process starts.
So then effectively you have a two-year window?
Yes, what we do them in batches, and you'll periodically see on the town website a list of checks that are unclaimed, and then every once in a while in the local newspaper you'll see an ad that we run, legal notice. And so from the time that the treasurer writes to the person, lets them know they have an uncashed check, they have 60 days to respond to the initial letter. If they don't respond to the initial letter, then after we post it on the website and put it in the newspaper, they have another year. So we do try to give them an opportunity to claim the funds, and most people do.
Okay. Are there any further questions regarding the fall annual town meeting warrant? Okay. Okay. With that, we'll sort of go to the last segment of our discussion this evening. And this, as I mentioned earlier, in our budget cycle at the end of September or October 1st, we will start the budget cycle for fiscal year 18. Basically, we'll be sending out guidelines to departments, capital requests, and so forth. And so that's where we'll be going in the weeks ahead. But I think I want to just take a quick look back for the past couple months and sort of guide us as to how we go forward. In your handout, you see there's a couple of news accounts. And basically, there's a revenue concern going on right now at the state level, and we're starting to see evidence of it at the local level. The state basically, if you saw what happened in the legislative process for the current fiscal year state budget, and in fact, they haven't even closed out the prior fiscal year state budget as we speak. That'll happen within the next few weeks. But the governor submitted his budget as he does in January. The House took up the budget, passed its version at the end of April. The Senate came in, passed its version at the end of May. Then they established a conference committee. And generally, the conference committee reconciles the amount of the Senate and the House budget to one figure. Well, all of a sudden, things were really thrown for a loop, and it's rather extraordinary because I don't think anyone had seen it in decades, never mind recent years. The state's revenue hit a revenue gap of about $1 billion that wasn't foreseen in the revenue estimates that they had provided when they set the budget target the previous December, or 6 months prior. And so, in sort of a rare or extraordinary move, the budget that came out of conference committee was less than either version that came out from the state House side or the Senate side, and obviously the governor weighed in and so forth. And we saw it a little bit. They protected local aid, but they did hit us with some offline, non-cherry sheet local aid, such as special education reimbursement and so forth. And the governor started announcing several initiatives in terms of controlling state spending. The problem is it didn't end there. Is we're now into the third month of the new fiscal year, and that's the second story that you see that came out just 11 days ago. The revenue projections through August were $42 million under the benchmark for the current year that's revised. What's happening right now is everyone at the state level in the revenue department is looking to see what the September revenues come in, because September is a significant month for the state's collections. You're out of the summer months. It's a withholding month for income withholding, and so the state takes in about roughly 10% of its revenues in the month of September. And obviously, you've got 12 months, so a normal month would be less than 10%. That's going to be their key tell sign. If they have a significant departure again in September, then you would expect the governor to start invoking authority to reduce the budget, and then this is where the whole question would come up in terms of not only the planning for the new year coming up ahead, but sort of how are they going to get through this current year's fiscal year, and that's where the whole issue of mid-year cuts and the whole discussion that we've seen in few rare instances about 9C cuts, i.e. local aid cuts in mid-year. We last saw that in the recession of 2008, where they basically cut the money after the first of the calendar year, even though it's almost 8 months into the new fiscal year, and we had to go to town meeting and so forth. And the strange part about all this is you're in a period that's a rather healthy economic period by some indicators. We're at full employment. In fact, we're beyond the level of full employment with a 3.9% unemployment rate. But yet what the state's not seeing and where they're lagging in is they're lagging in sales tax, they're lagging in income tax withholdings, and so that's what's giving everyone some pause in terms of what's going on. And obviously there's a bigger uncertainty about how will the country move forward as a result of the decision in November with the presidential and congressional elections and so forth. So there's a lot of anxiety, and in fact the state last week, the administration met with economists to say, well, I think the term was, is this a blip or is there something significant going on here? And I think right now it's a bit uncertain in terms of what's happening. What we do see at the local level is we're now starting to issue our guidelines, and what's happening is we sort of look out and do the same projection. And as Darlene mentioned in her earlier comments, and John's going to amplify them shortly, we look at, well, what indicators do we see in terms of our revenue sources? One is on the issue of new growth. As Frank noted earlier, in the assessor's office, they've just completed a townwide reval and property inspections. If we now look at what new projects are on the board and coming up, we don't see a lot. There's not, and if you sort of step back for a minute, they're going to open the auto fair up in Drum Hill within a matter of a couple of weeks. As you know, in the Chelmsford Center, they opened Andiamo's, and they're finishing that plaza, and obviously that construction's essentially complete. And what we saw last year, which is rather extraordinary, we saw all those new homes subdivided on Hunt Road and so forth, which was an extraordinary number of new home lot generations as well as new home construction. We're not seeing anything out there other than David Hedison starting. He just got his grant funding to do his phase 2 of his project on Littleton Road. And as we know, that doesn't affect our levy, so that's not going to help us. But the often maligned and talked about apartment 40B project on Mill Road, they haven't put a shovel in the ground, nor have they pulled a building permit, and that's going on 2 years now. And we just look elsewhere. We sort of see some projects potential, and probably the one that may go forward is the one that we see in the center it's under planning board review right now by the rail trail. But even if that is permitted, we won't see a shovel in the ground on that till probably next March or April. And then again, you're not going to get any significant value by June 30th for the new growth deadline. And so that's giving us some concern, because again, as Frank gave you the data there for the last 5 years, you get 1.4 million, 1.3 million, some years less than $1 million in new growth. We're sort of looking where it's a non-reval year and not seeing that type of permit activity out there. We could be below the $1 million revenue in terms of new growth. So that's what we look at as we start setting our guidelines. And then I'm going to have John sort of touch upon some of the local receipts about how Darlene, you remember earlier, talked about, the motor vehicle and so forth, and now, and obviously the homeless. So I'll just turn this over to John for some additional dialogue.
Thank you, Paul. Good evening, everyone. Just to hit a few points on the next few slides, just cover some, trends and issues that we see as we look at not only at this year's fiscal year 17, but when we look out at the coming year in 18. The slide that you see that says revenue trends in local receipts, a couple different things. Darlene touched on it as well as the town manager. We receive motor vehicle excise bills, tax commitments, and what a tax commitment is, it's basically a batch of bills that we receive from the Registry of Motor Vehicles, and it tells us the total number of bills and the amount that's to be issued and collected. When we look at these statistics over periods of time, like from July to September, we see, and you look at the commitments that we received during the exact same time period a year earlier, we see a little over a 6% decline for July to September. If you go back further and look from April to September of 2016 versus the same exact period a year prior, we see about an 11.5% decline. So again, not saying that motor vehicle excise is going to plummet or anything, just that when we looked at the record numbers that we received last year, it's unrealistic to think that's going to be a straight line up. And if you look in the financial press, you see articles that say that new car sales are slowing a bit, and that's really what's generating this. So just something to keep in mind as we plan out motor vehicle revenue for the next year's budget. In the area of hotel room occupancy tax, we collected $490,000 in fiscal year 16. There's been some changes recently. The Commonwealth of Mass Emergency Assistance Family Shelter Program sends us reports quarterly of the amount of hotel room tax that we collected in 16. About $74,000 can be attributed to the emergency shelter program. As we know from reading stories in the press, the Commonwealth has been transitioning families out of that program and into other alternative housing rather than hotels. So it's just something. If the hotels were able to rent these rooms for business travel, then we probably wouldn't see a loss. But where we're not a tourist attraction, it's either going to have to be business travelers, or we can expect to see a little decrease in the year ahead. Moving on to the next slide, we move over to the expense side of the budget. Just a couple of things to consider. The first item being health insurance, and when you look at that, this slide shows what we do is we track the statistics monthly, and we look at the total number of subscribers that you see on the top, and then we break it down into active employees and retirees. When you look at the change between fiscal year 2008 and fiscal 2016, what you notice is that the number of active employee subscribers actually decreased about just under 40 people during that time. With the retiree subscribers, it's a different story. It's actually it's increased about 136 by a total of 136. So it's a trend we're monitoring. In the first few months of this fiscal year, we've seen an increase of another 15 retirees. So if you flip to the next slide, that's an increase over time of about almost 19% in the number of retirees. So we'll continue to monitor this going forward. Usually by the October-November period, things shake out a little with people making changes in the health insurance program. You usually have new school employees starting in September. You have other things going on and changes. We'll monitor it, but at this point, we may need to revisit the health insurance budget and make an adjustment next spring. But like I said, we'll be monitoring this in the months ahead. Moving on to the retirement area, you see this is a chart of the Middlesex Retirement Assessment. This covers the amount the towns billed for all of the general government employees and also all of the non-teaching staff, or all the school staff that's not covered under the Mass Teachers Retirement System. If you look in the furthest column on the right, down near the bottom, you'll see that in the last few fiscal years, we've had increases of anywhere from about 400,000 up to as much as 600,000, $500,000. So if you keep that in mind going forward, the next slide, Middlesex County Retirement System basically conducts an actuarial valuation update every 2 years. And you can see from this slide that our fiscal year 16 and 17 assessments were determined from a valuation that was calculated as of January 1st, 2014. Our fiscal year 18 and 19 assessments will be based on a new valuation. The actuaries have been working on it for Middlesex County, and that one it will be as of January 1st, 16. We don't have all of the results yet, but what we do know, if you flip to the next slide, is Middlesex County currently uses an assumed investment return of 7.875. The goal of the retirement board is to lower that down another 1/8% due to the lower interest rate and lower investment return environment that we're in. If you look at the next few lines down, this shows the investment return that they earned in the market net of fees, and it's based on a calendar year. And you look at for 2014 and 2015, you see that in 2014, the investment rate of return was 7.54. In 15, the market had a tough year. It was, the investment return was 0.61. The investment return that's actually used to calculate in the valuation is on an actuarial basis. And what that means is to avoid big spikes and dramatic changes up and down based on the investments from one year to another, the actuaries use a smoothing formula. So what that means is the gains and losses are recognized over multiple years to smooth it out. And that's where you see the actuarial basis. What you do notice is on the last line down, even on an actuarial basis for 2015, the 7.1% return is below the assumed rate of return. So what all of this is telling us is that we don't have the numbers in yet, but you can most likely count on an increase in the assessment to make up for the difficult year. So we'll know more in the months ahead, probably around the November, December timeframe.
And that's because also they got to go to our actual employee retiree base, and that's growing as well. Which causes
the retiree base is growing, as Paul said, it's just people are living longer lifespans. As we all know, Middlesex is also looking with their actuaries to use a different type of mortality table that when they calculate for a specific employee, how long do we expect this employee to live and draw a pension, they're updating that to make it more on today's standards, and the actuaries do that work. I won't repeat the debt slides that we covered. We covered those earlier with the proposed 7.9 borrowing. If you flip ahead, there's a slide that says budget process. Next week, all the operating budget and capital budget materials will be available on September 28th. Departmental budget for general government departments will be due October 28th, as well as capital improvement requests from both general government and the school department will be due on October 28th. So that process will be ramping up very soon. And that concludes.
Yeah, so our instructions to when we issue those guidelines next week is going to be provide a level service budget. We're basically saying to the departments, and they're kind of gotten used to it at this point in recent years, basically saying, continue to operate forward as if the fiscal year didn't end. We're not looking to add employees, add programs, add services. How do we just bring ourselves going forward in terms of operations in light of the uncertainty and the challenges that we see before us? Obviously, the exception to that is going to be in the schools, where we noted earlier we do have the set aside for what would be the full-time kindergarten program starting up in September. So that will be an addition beyond the traditional increase that would be if that were not taking place. And then obviously, again, underneath all this is the fact that if we don't have contract settles, we have to keep a reserve for those contracts when they eventually do get settled. So that's also part of our balancing efforts and discussions. So in terms of where we go from here, just in closing, as we said, we'll let the guidelines out. We'll get those requests back at the end of October. We'll assemble those materials. Capital Planning Committee will meet in November. Usually they finish up early December, and I would imagine that, we as a whole group here, the Selectmen, Finance Committee, School Committee, will be at town meeting in October. The end of October town meeting would end. I would imagine we would probably get together after Thanksgiving, early December. At that point, we'll know a number of other items. We'll know the election will have ended, so there'll be some determination of where the country's leadership is going in terms of the economic aspects from that. Second of all, we'll have more data on the state's revenue situation. The state will be doing its revenue estimates again for the upcoming budget that they're planning for, because remember, the governor has to submit his budget plan by the end of January also. They'll be doing that in mid-December. We'll have the retirement assessments per community, so we'll know our retirement assessment from Middlesex by that time frame as well. And then the last piece that we'll be dealing with is health insurance. This year that we're in right now is the last year of our second 3-year initiative with our employees under the GIC benchmark plan. We have to revisit that this fall. I am awaiting, and hopefully we'll have information within the next week or so from our current insurer in terms of whether that plan will still be offered. We then have to circle back with the Public Employee Commission under the provisions of the acceptance of that act to discuss with them and meet with them in terms of how we go forward on health insurance. But again, and we're not going to belabor this point, but anyone who's watching health insurance cost trends, that's obviously a significant concern, particularly the area of prescription drugs and coverage. And so, we know that that's a challenge, again, which may be affected by what happens at the national level. But again, the increase this year was close to 7%. So those are the items that we're sort of equating as we get together. And again, I'm mindful of the fact that at the end of January, I have to submit a budget to the Board of Selectmen, Finance Committee, and obviously notify the School Committee of my recommendations so that we can complete a budget in a timely manner next April. So we're sort of back around again in the cycle. So with that concludes our formal presentations this evening. We open it up for any questions or comments or discussions. And I know before we leave, Sam Chase has an announcement on behalf of the Charter Committee. So, but before we get to that, are there any other questions or comments or concerns before we wrap up?
Paul, I noticed that in that article about Baker had vetoed several things. And I've been watching the papers, and I see that our state reps are overriding all those vetoes. I mean, I'm not asking you to look into a glass ball, but how do they resolve that?
Well, there's going to be an outcome. I mean, that's what it comes down to. There has to be an outcome. They still need to pass a reconciliation to close the books for fiscal year 16, which ended on June 30th. And then they've got to go forward with the state's fund in terms of how they're going to deal with their ongoing costs operationally. Now, the other thing that happened, and you didn't see mentioned tonight, although John did touch upon it, is the legislature at the end of July passed the Municipal Modernization Act, which did provide some measures of financial assistance at the local level. Why you're not seeing it at this fall town meeting is because unless it was otherwise provided for under the statute, the act doesn't become effective, an act of the legislature doesn't become effective until 90 days after it's enacted. 90 days after it was completed is not till November 7th. And I had explored the possibility and went to council, well, could we pass something and not make it effective until the date of effective? And the answer is no. You can't do local acceptance or these actions until the law becomes in effect. So what you will see as we go to Springtown meeting warrant, the warrant will be a little bit longer. We will look at some municipal relief measures as well as some other local control issues pertaining to speed limits and other things that are now at the local level. So we will be exhausting and vetting those out. In fact, myself and John and Darlene and Frank are going to a Department of Revenue a seminar on the new law in a few weeks to learn about that aspects of it. The other aspect that's coming into effect, two things before I close. One is the other thing that's going to be significant and will remind you of the Stormwater Management Act becomes effective as well. And in fact, I'm meeting with the regulations are out. It's being phased in. I'm meeting with the stormwater team in Public Works Engineering and the Director of Public Works, Gary Persichetti, and such later this week to talk about how we are going to meet that challenge in terms of operationally as well as fiscally, because that is not insignificant in terms of, the federal actions and what it's going to take, and that goes from things from street sweeping and sanding and stormwater monitoring and cleaning and so forth. So we're looking at that. That's not insignificant either, and so that's something that we have to bear in mind as we move forward. So again, we have our challenges at the local level in terms of municipal modernization, stormwater impact, and other aspects of how we conduct ourselves as a community in a period of like I said, some uncertainty.
Press questions?
I think Sam had an announcement tonight.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Town Manager. My name is Sam Chase. I live at 5 River Meadow Drive. I'm here representing the Charter Review Committee, who has asked me to start the process of letting the public know that we're underway and that we will be welcoming public input at our meetings. So to that end, I'll just read a very short statement that the committee would like to make to the general public. Every 10 years, the state requires that a town review its charter if it has one, and we do, so we must. The Selectmen appointed a committee for this purpose, which is obviously called the Charter Review Committee, and that committee consists of 9 Chelmsford citizens. We've started our work, and our work may result in the committee making recommendations to the Board of Selectmen for possible modifications to the charter. We meet at Town Hall, room 204, at 7 p.m., usually on the 2nd and 4th Tuesdays of every month. And those meetings have been scheduled through the balance of this year. The meetings are broadcast live on Chelmsford Telemedia. And the committee welcomes anyone interested in providing input to the charter review process to attend our meetings, where anyone is able to speak during our open session at the start of each meeting. You will also have the opportunity to provide your input during a special public input session, and that will be scheduled very shortly, and you'll be able to see what that date is by looking at our calendar, which will be available along with additional Charter Committee information on the town website. So you can go to www.townofchelmsford.us and go to the upper right-hand side of that page and look for the Find It Fast tab. Click on that tab, and then you'll see a search box at the upper left-hand side of that page, and just type in Charter Review Committee and hit enter, and that'll bring you to the site that contains all the information about the current Charter Review Committee, its activities, and also it will give you information relating to the prior charter review that was done 10 years ago. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam. Any press questions?
What are you going to do it?
No? Do I hear a motion?
To adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Pat moved. Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you very much. Good evening.